You've probably heard someone say, "This just isn't working." Like my remote right now. It just isn't working. Or, "I'm never going to make it. I should just give up." Whether it's the 13-year-old that has just been told, or in my case, 15, that you got cut from the basketball team, or the 45-year-old that has just been informed that a robot is going to replace him on the line, and 20 years of service is about to be wiped out in a company he thought he'd be with for his life. Or, as just happened in the last couple of weeks, in order for Walmart to raise the minimum wage of their employees up to $15 an hour, they had to inform over half of their co-managers in their stores that they were no longer needed. Men and women accustomed to making just shy of $100,000 a year with salary and bonuses, suddenly without a job, in order for others to have a little bit better. It's just not working. For some, the story of that is a collision with reality that is going to destroy their lives. For others, well, it's a stepping stone to success because they know how to overcome. I'm going to do something today that I don't normally do. I'm going to endorse a movie for you and encourage you to go see it. Put a poster up this past week on the bulletin board in the back hallway for the movie I Can Only Imagine. Many of you probably remember the song that came out in the late 90s, and it played on Christian stations, but surprisingly it crossed over into almost every other kind of station. For many, many weeks, on every station in the country, I Can Only Imagine was the number one requested song. Bart Millard was the writer of that song. He is the head man, the lead singer of the group Mercy Me. Millard, in the 2000s, has won 8 Dove Awards, 2 Grammys. In 2005, he was named today's best male vocalist, Christian male vocalist. And in 2003, he was the Christian Songwriter of the Year for the ASCAPs. A man who found great success. But you may not know the backstory. And the movie is all about his life and where he was before he is today. What brought him to that place of success? In the writing and the acceptance of I Can Only Imagine. Bart Millard, as a young child, grade school, his mother had taken all the verbal abuse she could take from a husband that every day berated her. She was never good enough, and she left. She had no means of supporting a child and left the child in his hands. It wasn't just verbal abuse for Bart, it became physical abuse. And he grew up in that household, never able to satisfy his father. He became a songwriter, and they traveled the country, the group that became Mercy Me. But all the critics told him he'd never make it. He could never do what his passion, that he might as well give up and make his living some other way. The movie is the story of how God works in situations like that to bring us to victory. The woman we look at today in John chapter 4, the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman at the well, and that's the important part of the story. The The story begins with Jesus in verse 4 when it says he needed to go through Samaria. And I'm not going to read all the verses. It's a familiar story. You know that Jesus stopped at the village that was her hometown. And he sent his disciples into town to get lunch because it was the 6th hour. It was lunchtime. He was hungry and he was tired. And he stopped and sent them into town. I'll rest here while you bring lunch. There at the well, he met a woman, a Samaritan woman. And he asked her for a drink of water. Verse 9, she says to him, "How is it that you, being a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman?" For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. It's not just that. Jewish men didn't talk to women in public. Robin, if Paul met you in the street, he wouldn't talk to you. Where do we go? Jesus answered her and said, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him and he would have given you living water." And the story progresses as she continues to try to deflect him from his precision dissection of her life. As layer after layer is revealed until the bare bone is there. And he can begin to heal her life. She throws question after question at him, brings religion into it, and still Jesus will not be diverted. For he has come to this place. Why did he need to go through Samaria? It was to meet this woman and change her life. Change her life. Pastor Gordon MacDonald asserts that the modern lifestyle makes us susceptible to spiritual desolation as people lose touch with reality. Desolation. He describes it this way. He says it's feelings of numbing fatigue, dejection from apparent failures, disillusionment about missed goals or lost purposes. This woman was at that place, her life torn up with the bleak feeling of loneliness, even though she had relationships, but they weren't fulfilling either. She had a past filled with bad decisions and wrong turns, and like many people today, she wasn't willing to make things right, to accept help. Here was a woman that was desperate for change. Desperate for change. She didn't know it, but Jesus was about to bring it. Have you ever been in that place of loneliness? No doubt her heart was aching 24/7. A life that filled with regret and missed opportunities. Someone who invested herself into one relationship after another, trying to find meaning and purpose and joy and satisfaction, and only to be disappointed over and over and over again. She came to the well in the middle of the day when the norm was for women to come in the cool of the evening. They would bring their jugs, they would bring their pots, they would bring that which they would dip their water into for the next day. And there at the well, they would sit and they would talk. They would see their friends. They would share the day's business. They would gossip. They would talk about families and talk about their little ones, and they would do what friends do. But here was a woman that avoided all that, because you see her life, her past. 5 husbands, Jesus said, and the one you live with now is not your husband. Her past had put her in that position where she was like the guy with the sign on his back, "Kick me." And she had been kicked. She'd had enough of the women whispering about her. She'd had enough of those sideways glances as they kind of moved away from her. She'd had enough of people that would not look her in the eye because of her guilt. And she wouldn't look anyone in the eye because she was guilty. She'd had enough of that. If I'm going to be lonely, I'll be alone, was what she felt. And she came in the middle of the day. Perhaps she walked to the well each day dreaming of something better, something different, something of what might have been, knowing that it could not be, but just wishing that life would change. Little did she know that on this day, when she came to the well, it was about to get interesting, because there was Jesus. And he's no ordinary man. He asked her for a drink, and that surprised her. "If you would just ask of me," he said, "I'll give you living water, and you'll never thirst again." He wasn't speaking of a physical thirst, because that's an impossibility. You and I know that if you go without food for a few days, you'll be hungry. If you go without water or drink for a few days, you'll die. That's the fact of this body that we have. But the living water speaks of something far greater. It speaks of that spiritual thirst that is within every human being, that need for a relationship with a holy God, that need to have that time with God. And all of us, at times in our lives, are at this point of thirst. May not be right now, but you know of that time in your life when you had it. You probably will experience it as you allow circumstances or events, as you allow people to put you down, as you allow what just goes on in the normal process of being a family, as you allow that to drag you away from your relationship with God, the time that you spend with Him, and you become thirsty and needy and parched. She was at that point. Religion doesn't do it. She was a woman who had religious training. It was obvious from the discussion as she carries it on with Jesus. It was the religion of her people. We worship on this mountain. You, the Jews, say that you worship on the mountain there in Jerusalem. Who's right and who's wrong? How am I going to find God? And Jesus wouldn't let her talk about religion. He wanted to talk about relationship. She was desperate for a change. She had sought it in relationships with men, and that had not worked. In my first pastorate 40 years ago now, one of my deacons came to me and about his sister. I knew her. She had been to our church on occasion, and I knew her history. She was 35 years old, had already been married 5 times. In that day, only the movie stars were that kind of folks. He came to me to ask me, he said, "I know what your answer is going to be, but my sister is going to get married again. And she wants to know if you will do the service. Maybe," she said, "it'll do it right." I had talked with her. The men that she found were found in the wrong places, generally in a bar somewhere. The relationship she had never lasted because she didn't invest herself in. But here's what she said to me: I live in the real world, and you don't. And there is some truth in that. I live in a world surrounded by church folks, and hey, church folks can get ugly. The real world is uglier still. Real world. Bart Millard, I told you, grew up in an abusive family. His father, named Arthur, believed in living in the real world. He had been a football hero in his high school years, had expected to graduate and go on to college, and had an offer for a scholarship for that very thing, to make him a success in life. But his family life was such that when he graduated from high school, he had to go to work. And all of his dreams washed away. He got married. Beautiful, beautiful woman. They had a good time. Arthur had an accident, brain injury. He recovered from it, but from that point on, he was never the same. He was angry. He took his anger out on his wife. They had a little boy, and happiness was compounded in for a little while, but this abuse kept on, and before long she couldn't take it, and she left him with the boy, and I've already told you that part of the story. Bart grew up with a father that crushed him at every opportunity. Bart lived being kicked around. He lived in his imagination. The movie opens with him building a helmet and riding his bicycle like it was a Star Wars speedster. He dreamed of something better and bigger, and his father would crush those dreams. As a teenager, he became a football player because he wanted to impress his dad, and he was doing that. He was the star of the team, and then because his father pushed him so hard, one day he pushed too far, and Bart was injured. An injury he would never recover from, would never be able to play football again, and his father once more crushed his dreams. He turned to music because he found that he was good at it. This dreamer side of him wrote poetry, and he could write songs. It became popular in the school in their plays. I think it was Oklahoma. He may have been Curly, I don't know, but he was the man of the musical, and his dad wouldn't come. He found Jesus during this time because a girl invited him to go to church, and he found the Lord. He trusted in Jesus, but his life didn't change, and his father kept on. This is what his father said: "Dreams don't pay the bills, Bart. All they do is keep you from knowing what is real." You understand that? Living in the real world. Here was a woman that lived in the real world, and her world was not a good one. We're surrounded with people like that. This past week, we were horrified with the shooting down there close to Miami, and 17, most of them students, but a few teachers lost their lives. A young man who seemingly out of the clear blue, but finding out that it was not so cut and dried, comes in and shoots his former school up. Immediately there's that group that wants you to do away with guns, but it's not guns that do things like this. The other side is crying out about mental illness, and there is truth in that. Most of those that do something like this, somewhere or another, they've snapped. And there are signs ahead of time that we need to be watchful for. But the truth of the matter is, this guy was just like this woman and like so many others in our society, filled with dreams, and yet in their dreams everyone is pushing them down, or reality infringing and taking away that which brings meaning to them, purpose to them. They're searching for something that they cannot find, and the truth of the matter is it's Jesus. And they just don't know it. There was another death this past week. He's been called the greatest evangelist since not since Billy Graham, that's who it was, since Paul the Apostle. One of Southern Baptist leaders said that he was the greatest Southern Baptist preacher that's ever been. A man that for over 60 years preached in revivals and crusades and represented the Lord well, to the point that over 200 million people heard him proclaim the gospel, a simple gospel, the truth that you're a sinner, I'm a sinner, we're all sinners, but Jesus died on that cross to pay the price for our sin, and all we have to do is trust in him. And if we allow him to, if we trust in him, he will forgive us and bring us into a relationship with himself, a relationship that will change our lives. And that was the message he preached for year after year after year, spoke it when he had the opportunity, made the movies as technology changed, and Billy Graham and his organization moved with that, but it was always the pure gospel that Jesus loves you and he died on that cross for your sin, and he will change your life if you will accept him, because he's the living water. That's the message that he gave to this woman. Desperate for a change in her reality. As Jesus continually brought her back to the message that he had to give, her broken dreams would not be allowed to define her or confine her any longer, because he had come to see her. She may have come to the well because of thirst, but she was ultimately drawn to the Christ and the living water that he offered. Because that was her need. There was a song in the 1980s that was a part of a movie, Urban Cowboy. Looking for love in all the wrong places. That's what this woman was doing. She just wanted to be loved. And Jesus had come to this place to do that very thing. Justin Timberlake, a few years ago, added to his repertoire a song that was popular in the 1960s. It was a blues song, first performed by Otis Redding and then later by several others. And Justin Timberlake picked it up, put it in his repertoire, sung it with a number of people, even sung it in a session at the White House with President Obama. Otis Redding was the original singer. This is the chorus. Look like nothing's going to change. Everything still remains the same. I can't do what 10 people tell me to do, so I guess I'll remain the same. Sitting here resting my bones, and this loneliness won't leave me alone. Sitting on the dock of the bay, wasting time. Have you been there? At the bottom? At the well of despair, for that's where this woman was, although she called it Jacob's well. At the well of desperation. Had tried this and that and nothing would satisfy, and yet here was Jesus. Day after day after day, going through the same motions and finding emptiness. Her soul was a spiritual wasteland despite the religion that she had. A desert. She needed the living water. We're surrounded by people crying out in that very same way. Desperate for a change. But I want you to see, and I hope that you know, if you will live for Jesus each day, if you'll let them see Jesus in you, they will be drawn to the Christ too. If you'll love them as Jesus loved her, willing to go beyond the secular boundaries, the social boundaries that would have kept him from this place, willing to go out of his way in his life so that he could meet her there that day, pushing aside the physical tiredness of a traveling day and seeing in her someone who needed something that he could give and giving to her. We're surrounded by people in need like she is. They will not find Jesus. They will not be drawn to Christ unless they see Jesus in you. Unless you're willing to meet them at the well of their despair, the well of desperation. Isaiah chapter 58:11 says, "The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your soul in drought. You will be like a watered garden and like a spring of water whose waters do not fail." If you allow him to walk with you each day, if you'll walk with him each day, you'll come to this very same place, and when someone is there in this place of desperation, you will have the answer. It's not you, and it's not this church, it's Jesus. It's a faith in a Christ that loved them enough to die on that cross for them, as we sang earlier. It's that simple gospel that Jesus cared enough that he would go to the cross for them. This woman was convinced that the wrong turns in her life had taken her down a road of no return. She was trapped, ruined, forever without hope, until Jesus came along to be a light, to offer her something that no one else could offer. "Give me that water," she said. "Well, I'll do that. Bring your husband." And she said, "I have no husband." Jesus said, "You've spoken rightly. You've had 5 husbands, and the man you live with now is not your husband." How can you know that? And she throws out the religion question again. We know that the Jews say that the Christ will come through them. And Jesus said, "I am He." And immediately, it says, she dropped her jugs, set them down carefully because they were valuable, and ran back to town. She had avoided seeing anyone, but now everyone she met, come with me and see the one that knows everything about me. Everything about me. Come and see what Jesus has done for me. when you come face to face with Christ and the love that he has to offer, the first inclination, the first thing that you feel like you must do is tell other people about it. Where are you in your relationship to Jesus? The Bible says very clearly we'll never be happy in our lives until we are whole with Christ. No matter what we plug in, material possessions, relationships, jobs, no matter what we do, trying to make meaning and purpose for on a daily basis, it'll fail until Jesus is given priority. From that point on, he puts everything else in the right perspective. Where are you in your walk with Christ? Are you sharing Jesus on a daily basis? Are you telling others about what he's done for you? Are you offering up to them the opportunity to come to know the Christ that you know? A couple of weeks ago, a visitor to our church, he's been a regular visitor for a number of months now. Sunday school, and even coming on Wednesday night some, and that's unusual. Medically retired, met one of our guys walking, and they struck up a relationship, and he's been coming ever since last fall. Knocked on the door of the office and came in and sat down and said, "Brother James, I want to know, do you have a card or something that I can give to other people? I'm interested in inviting them to the church and finding that which I have found here, a people that care and a people that love, and I want to share that with them. Do you have some means for me to leave in their hands?" And a business card would be the best thing, because people take a business card and they can put it in their wallet, in their purse, they can put it. And Dave is one of our boat people. All of a sudden, in the past few months, we've had a number of different people that coming from the marinas up here. We've had, through the years, people that visited from the marinas occasionally as they would come and spend a week or two. These are permanent residents for right now of the marinas, and they've been coming to church, and Dave is one of those. I said, "Dave, I don't have a card except my business card. I'll tell you what, I can get something though. On the table as you go out that door, up here on the rail, there's a card. I want you to pick that card up. 1 of them, 2 of them, 4 of them, 5 of them, ever how many you think you can give away this week. And I want you to think about somebody like this woman that has a need of a relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. That is a simple card of invitation. Come to this church. It has the church name, the church location, and our telephone number. It has my name on it, that's all. But it has the hands of reaching out toward one another. And the idea of Christianity is you're going to reach out to somebody else and you're going to touch them with the love of God, and that love of God through you is going to draw them to Jesus. To be drawn to the Christ is what is needed in this world. No matter the laws that we pass, it's not going to change our society. No matter how much we want things to be better, it's not going to get better until our world comes back to Jesus. It's not going to happen because of religion. It's not going to happen because of coming to church. That's a big thing, but it's not the thing. The thing is knowing Jesus in a personal way, because Jesus knows you and He loves you. No matter where you've been in your past, He loves you. And He wants to be your friend.